Hello, this is HT Wingnet, and today I wanted to talk to you about hard drives, in particular desktop hard drives like you see here. Kind of just go over the specifications for them and give you an idea for what you might want to look for if you're going to buy a hard drive for your PC, for your NAS, for your surveillance unit, whatever. First off, there's only three manufacturers of hard drives these days, and by hard drives I mean like you see here, not SSDs, just the actual spinning disk hard drives, like both the 3.5 inch as well as the laptop type hard drives like these. And those three manufacturers are Western Digital, Seagate, and Toshiba. And drives are typically categorized in four ways, and those would be consumer, NAS or network attached storage, surveillance, and enterprise or data center or cloud storage type drives. Consumer drives, like this WD Blue and this Barracuda Compute, are usually lower capacity, lower endurance, and have a shorter warranty, and for the most part, hard drives have been replaced by SSDs in consumer devices, just because consumers typically use less capacity drives, 2 terabyte and smaller, and you can find reasonably priced 2 terabyte SSDs these days, and the SSDs are just faster, use less power typically, and are just quieter overall than a hard drive. Now, then you also have the NAS drives, which can go into something like this, this Synology unit or a homemade NAS unit with made from PC parts, whatever. But those kind of machines are typically designed so that your drives need to run 24/7, run in some sort of RAID configuration, and have a large number of disks at once in a rack. And that's how these drives are designed to accommodate that type of setup. And they usually have a much higher endurance than like a desktop hard drive for a PC or a consumer drive. And they also typically have a longer warranty. Surveillance drives are similar to NAS drives in that they have similar endurance and warranty, but they also have an extra feature set to them that like an NVR will make use of so that it can skip errors in the event of some issue that they have while reading the disk, so that it doesn't compromise additional recording or playback of video footage. And then finally, you have like an enterprise or data center drive like this guy, and those usually are higher capacity drives, although they don't have to be. They're designed to have a large number of disks in a single rack, not just a dozen, but several dozen to hundreds. And they also have a much higher endurance rating and also a long warranty. They also some come with specialty formatting for self-encryption and things like that. Regarding warranty, you should be careful when you buy a drive because there's really two types of drives that you can buy, either OEM or retail. Now, an OEM drive typically is where somebody can buy these in bulk, and the warranty is typically through the sale vendor. So if you buy an OEM drive, it's probably going to be warranted only by the person that you're buying it from, not necessarily from the OEM, the original manufacturer, like Toshiba, Western Digital, or Seagate. Now, if you buy a retail package drive, that should come with a warranty directly from Toshiba, Seagate, or Western Digital, which is really probably what you want, because a third-party reseller, who knows how long they're going to be in business, maybe you do trust them, so maybe that's okay, but just something to consider. Now, retail package drive should come in something like this, right? It should basically, this is the Western Digital version, but Seagate and Toshiba have something similar. So if you get it just a bare drive in a bubble wrap or something, it's more than likely just an OEM drive. And when you get a hard drive, you should check with on the manufacturer's site, plug in the serial number, and double check the warranty period for that drive. If it says not valid, get with the seller and see what kind of warranty is associated with it, or better yet, just ask them ahead of time. Also, you can usually register your hard drive online with the manufacturing website, and if you provide them with proof of purchase, normally the warranty starts from the date of manufacture as listed on the hard drive, but if you provide them with a receipt, usually they will give you a warranty starting from the date of purchase. So that's just something to be wary of, because you don't want to buy a drive thinking you're under warranty and then something happens to it, you go to exchange it with Western Digital, for example, and they say, sorry, but we don't cover this. You have to go back to the person you bought it from, and then you go back to that person, and that person is no longer selling drives or really doesn't honor the warranty. So just something to consider. Okay, now we'll kind of just look at the specifications of hard drives. Each manufacturer has specifications pretty much listed on their website. You can go ahead and go there and pull it up and get more details on it if you need to. I'll go ahead and go over that briefly in a little bit, but I'm going to also cover just some of the basic things that you should look for. Physically, you may be looking at all these drives. Okay, we've got a consumer drive, a NAS drive, surveillance drive, a enterprise drive here. So what the heck is different about these physically? The actual form factor is defined by the SNIA spec SFF 1801, and if you scroll through that and look at that, you can see that they define the actual dimensions of the hard drive as well as the hole locations for the screw mounts. Now you do have some that are thinner, like this guy here. You can see it's definitely thinner. That's only because it's got fewer platters on it, so they can make it thinner. And consumer drives typically may come in a little bit thinner packages because it also cuts down on cost. But physically, you also have what's called SATA connector. This is the power connector and this is the data connector. And that's pretty typical for consumer and NAS and surveillance level drives. Although typically on enterprise type drives, you also have typically an option for what's called SAS or serial attached SCSI connectors like this. If you compare that with a SATA connector, you can see they look similar, but they're definitely different. This one has this little bump in the middle. Now SATA is kind of a subspec of the SAS spec. So SATA connectors can actually fit inside of an SAS port, but a SAS connector cannot fit inside a SATA port. Another physical difference that you might notice is on the mounting holes. And on the side, you typically have 3 mounting holes, and on the back, you have 2. And that's the same on both sides. But you do have drives. Some of the larger capacity drives, you'll notice that they have the 2 mounting holes on the bottom are in different locations than those on the top. Sorry, are in different locations than those on here. So some drives actually have 3 mounting holes here too. That is something to consider when you're buying a drive, but more importantly on the side, you can see this one only has 2 mounting holes, whereas this one has 3. Some PC cases only have mounting provisions, or adapter brackets or whatever, only have provisions for the first and second holes, so you may want to look for some form of adapter bracket so that it will attach to the first and the last hole. A lot of PC case manufacturers will offer you an upgrade for free to an adapter bracket to mount to both the first and the last holes if it's designed initially to just mount to these 2 holes. I know Fractal Design offer an adapter bracket for their cases. Now I've also seen 3D printed brackets too that you can make pretty straightforward to allow you to do that as well. One more thing to consider is something called advanced format, also known as 4K native or 4KN formatting. What that means is it's referring to the actual physical formatting of the sectors on the hard drive. Hard drives 10 plus years ago actually had 512 byte sector sizes. They switched over to the new advanced format sector size to help improve it with error correction, and with the increased capacity of the hard drives, they basically needed a larger sector size as well for that. Pretty much all your hard drives today are 4KN or advanced format hard drives, especially your consumer drives, NAS drives, and surveillance drives. Pretty much no question there. Anything manufactured in the last 10 years have been using that format. But data center drives, enterprise drives, they still offer options for 512 byte sector sizes, either as emulated or native. So you'll see it supporting 512E or 512N. 512E is basically a 4K native hard drive. It's just it's formatted to emulate the old 512 byte sector sizes. So what it will do is it will divide the 4K kilobyte sector size into 8 logical, virtual, or emulated byte partitions. Now if you do get a 512E drive, you may have to actually reformat or run a tool to update the formatting to actually have 4K in size. Otherwise your system will see it as a 512 byte drive, and that could cause some performance issues. Is it compatible with your PC and your NAS and everything? More than likely yes, but it's best to stick with the advanced formatting of the hard drive for best performance and compatibility. Other things that it can have is helium or air filled, and it basically is just like it sounds. They either run off of air as a medium inside of it or helium. And you can identify the difference between them is air-filled drives are all these guys here. You can notice that they have exposed screws, whereas a helium drive has no exposed screws. And why that is because you can remove the lid of an air drive because it's actually exposed to the air. The thing to note, though, is that even though it's exposed to the air, it kind of does that just to regulate pressure. It actually has a very fine particulate filter, and this one shows it. It's right in here. Seagate drives tend to have a hole on the bottom. You can see the white there. That's where the filter is for, when air passes through there. So no dust. Any contamination gets in there, it's going to destroy your data and your drive. Now, air-filled drives typically are your smaller capacity drives from 10 terabyte and under. 8 terabyte and 10 terabyte drives can either be air-filled or helium-filled. And 12 terabyte and over are pretty much 100% guaranteed to have helium-filled. So, like this guy is an 8 terabyte helium-filled drive. And this is a 10 terabyte drive, but it's air-filled. Right? You can see the screw holes and everything on here. So they exist in both. Now you may be wondering, why would you want helium over air or air over helium? Well, typically, I think helium is a better option, only because it, compared to air, helium drives tend to use less power and generate less heat and less noise. A 2 terabyte air-filled hard drive could use probably close to as much, if not more, than a 20 terabyte helium-filled hard drive. So that's how significant it is. We'll take a look at that in the specifications as well. You're going to see 3 different types of power consumption: startup, idle, and active. Startup is just as it sounds, is basically the power required to get the drive to start up. Now usually it's not always even specified in what that startup power is, or it'll identify it as amps. Usually it's amps at 12 volt. But most drives will require anywhere from 20 to 40 watts of power just to start up. Once they start up and they're sitting idle, usually it's only between like 4 to 6 watts, and active it's usually anywhere from 6 to 10 watts while it's actually doing reads and writes to the hard drive. So an important factor there is a startup power, because if you have a bunch of hard drives in a machine that you put together to work as a NAS, you may have trouble even powering up all the drives, and you may be wondering why. Part of it could be it could not provide enough current for all those drives. There is hardware that you can get that will stagger the startup of your drives if that's necessary, or you can just get a proper beefy power supply that'll provide enough power for that. Now we talked about endurance a little bit, and that relates to what's called workload rate limit. And workload rate limit is basically the amount of data that a drive combined can read and write. So not just writes, not just reads, but combined reads and writes to and from the drive. The higher the workload rate limit usually corresponds to a longer warranty too. So like your high-end data center drives and your high-end NAS drives that have typical 550 terabyte per year workload rate limit corresponds with about a 5-year warranty. The mid-range NAS drives have a 180 to 300 terabyte per year with a 3-year warranty typical. Same with a surveillance drive. And then your lower-end consumer drives, lower capacity drives, are usually 55 to 100 terabytes per year workload rate limit, and usually have a 2-year warranty. Now the workload rate limit itself is the same for that line of drives regardless of capacity. Just because you have a larger capacity drive doesn't mean it's going to have a longer endurance rating. So what does that mean when you reach that workload rate limit? Does that mean when you hit that 550 terabyte or 300 terabyte per year limit that your drive's just going to die? No. Basically it's just based on the total life of the drives as they're designed and tested to do. So it just means that's kind of like their upper or lower limit of when they expect the drive could start to have issues, or is a higher risk of having issues. There's many drives that can go well beyond that point. And last, but certainly not least, is something called SMR, or shingled magnetic recording. Traditional hard drives use something called CMR, or conventional magnetic recording, which is synonymous with PMR, or perpendicular magnetic recording. So to summarize, CMR is the same as PMR, and SMR is basically using the same technology as PMR. It's how the tracks are laid out on the hard drive platter itself. SMR tends to make things cheaper because you can fit more data on a platter, so you can use fewer platters on a hard drive, and so you can get more data on fewer platters than a CMR drive. The problem with that is that it results in a poor write performance when you've done a lot of writes to the disk, deleting a lot of data, and writing to the disk again. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that because it's a little bit more complicated and it'd take a lot more time in this video than I'd like to do, but I'll leave a couple links in the description on SMR if you'd like. Now, SMR disks doesn't mean they're bad. They work best as kind of like an archive disk, like if you want to store a bunch of your movies or videos or your music collection or whatever, you just kind of dump it to the hard drive, and it basically sits there. It's not data that you're going to delete and update and modify a lot. It'll work fine for that. If you find an SMR drive that's you want to use, let's say, a 6 terabyte drive, if you want to use for like a Steam collection, I would not do that, only because when Steam updates games, it will copy that data to a new location, download the new data, delete the old data, update with the new data, and copy that data back to the original location. So that's a lot of write, delete, write operations that is not conducive to a good performance on an SMR drive. Again, SMR is typically found on just consumer level drives because they can drive down the cost fitting more data on a platter, and most home users, I guess they figure, use it more just to back up their computers or store a lot of data on it and not do a whole lot of delete operations. And so typically your SMR disks are anywhere from 1 terabyte to 8 terabytes in capacity. I think Seagate, they have SMR drives from 8 terabyte down to 1 terabyte on the Barracuda line. Western Digital has the Blue line, which are all SMR, but that's only 1 terabyte to 6 terabyte. And other than that, everything else is pretty much CMR. Okay, so here we are at Western Digital's website, and link to the WD Red Pro NAS hard drive as an example. They don't give a whole lot of detail, just pull down menu here, but if you scroll down, a little bit of detail, but you can pull up the actual product brief down here. And then Seagate, they give a little bit more detail on their site. You can get all the capacities right in front of you, along with different workload rate limits and whether it's helium or air. Scroll down, then you've got the data sheet. And then Toshiba, similarly, they give you a little bit of detail of your drive itself, and then over on the left to pop up the data sheet here. Now, I'm not going to go through each of the manufacturer detailed product sheets. I'm just going to go through Seagate because it seems to be the most complete compared to the other two, at least gives the most data. But basically, the most important data pretty much are on every manufacturer website's data sheets. Okay, so here we have the Iron Wolf Pro spec sheet, and it's probably the most complete of the three manufacturers, although the most important information is usually present on all three manufacturer spec sheets. But you're just using this as an example, and things to be look out for. You can see here we've got 20 terabyte and 20 terabyte drives. Well, what's the difference? Well, here it's got a difference between the 550 terabyte per year workload rating and 300 terabyte per year workload rating. That's the only difference between these drives. My only assumption is that these will be cheaper because it's got a lower workload rating, even though they each have a 5-year warranty. Other specs we talked about, SATA interface as opposed to SAS, helium or air, and you go down here to 10 terabyte, you can see here it's got either air or helium. Here you've got air, helium, air. So what's the difference between these? You got to look and see that this one has a 550 terabyte per year workload rate limit, and these two have only 300. And you can see something similar here. Once you get 8 terabyte and below, they're all air. And then they have a mixture of 550 terabyte per year, 300 terabyte per year workload rating. Going back up to the top, spindle speed, not as important. Pretty much anything larger capacity is going to be 7,200 RPM. It's really only like the really small I guess small by today's standards, capacity drives like 4 terabyte and under will probably have 5400 RPM, maybe 6 terabyte and under. And what you want to look at is the maximum sustained transfer speed. The higher capacity drives with the higher density platters, well, obviously that'll increase more because you can get more data on a platter, and the rotational speed's the same, so that's going to increase. You don't have a lot of control over that, though. Now, power consumption, we talked about that briefly. The confusing thing here is actually they list amps here versus watts for the rest of these specs here. So talked about startup current here. This takes 2 amps of startup currents at 12 volt. That's 24 watts of startup current or startup power required. And that's completely different from the idle or average operating power consumption of 5.5 or 7.7 watts consecutively. So to start up, you need 24 watts, but once it's running, you need at most 8 watts of power draw while it's active. And hard drives also, the 3.5-inch desktop drives require 12 volt and 5 volt power. That's why you don't see desktop hard drives being powered by a USB port. USB port can only supply 5 volts, and laptop hard drives only require a 5 volt power supply to operate. Now, as far as operating temperatures, it does say 65°C, some say 70°C, some say 60°C, but the general rule of thumb is to keep it under 45°C. The cooler the better. A warmer running hard drive will typically reduce its lifespan. Now, as far as noise and vibration, I would take these with a grain of salt. A lot can matter here. Depends on, I've heard of different sounds from drive to drive. It also depends on how it's mounted in the computer, in the NAS device, in the rack. Can make a big difference in the actual acoustics. Again, most of the noise comes from the seek operation of the hard drive read-write head. And there's your thickness, 1 inch, which I mentioned. That's your typical thickness. And other than that, that's about it. I put together a spreadsheet to hopefully summarize all the details for these drives to make it easier to understand. And what we have here is the current lineup for the North American market, at least, and everything that I could glean from their website and other sources as of today in December 2022. And you can see here we've got the 3 different drive manufacturers: Western Digital, Seagate, and Toshiba. And then I also list the drive type: consumer, NAS, surveillance, or enterprise, the workload rating associated with those drive lines, the warranty, and then you can see across the top here you've got the capacities anywhere from 500 gigabyte to 26 terabyte, and that just shows what drives are what capacity in that drive lineup. Now you'll see some symbols here, characters here, and I have a legend down below. And the C stands for CMR drives, S stands for SMR drives, 5 stands for 5400 RPM or 5640 RPM, and 7 stands for 7200 RPM. Now if you see a column here, or a cell with both C and S in it, means it's got both CMR or an SMR version available. So be wary that you could be getting either or, and sometimes they identify it with specific part numbers, sometimes they don't. And then if you see like a 5 and a 7, and I think I have an example right here, it means that they make a version both at 5400 RPM and at 7200 RPM. So something to be cognizant of as well. And real quick, you can see the drive lineups for Western Digital. For consumers are blue and black. For red is their NAS line, purple is their surveillance line, gold and Ultrastar are their enterprise lines. For Seagate, they've got the Barracuda and Firecuda drives for the consumer line, Iron Wolf for their NAS, Skyhawk for surveillance, and Exos for enterprise. And then Toshiba have the P300, X300 for the consumer, the N300 for the NAS, S300 for surveillance, and the MG line for enterprise. You can see across the board, all of them have a 550 terabyte per year workload and 5-year warranty for both for all 3, Western Digital, Seagate, and Barracuda. And when it comes to surveillance and NAS drives, though, it's pretty much 180 or 300 terabytes per year, but Seagate does have a 550 terabyte per year NAS drive workload rating on their Iron Wolf Pro. They have both a 550 terabyte per year and a 300 terabyte per year version, which I was brought up before. And as far as consumer drives are concerned, they're all less than 100 terabyte per year. Western Digital and Toshiba do not specify a workload rating, but anything I could get from that is that it's all less than 100 terabyte per year, and Barracuda actually specify 55 terabyte per year workload rating. So that should be about it for now. I will leave a link to this in the description if you want to download it, or you can just pause the screen right here and take a quick glean at it if you want to. Just remember that this is current information that I could get. Different markets outside of North America may have a different drive lineup, although it's typically pretty common internationally. There might be a drive or two that are a little bit different, but as far as now the North American market, this is what I could glean from their website. Okay, let's summarize everything we just talked about. There's 3 drive manufacturers: Seagate, Western Digital, and Toshiba. And they categorize their drives as 4 different types: consumer, NAS or network attached storage, surveillance, and enterprise. Consumer drives tend to be lower endurance, lower workload rating, shorter warranty, lower capacity, 8 terabyte and smaller usually, and can include SMR and are 5400 to 7200 RPM spindle speed. NAS drives are medium endurance as well as surveillance drives. They're very similar. Both have medium endurance, range capacity from 1 terabyte to 20 terabyte, have a 3 to 5 year warranty depending on the workload rating, which is usually either 180 or 300 terabyte workload rating per terabyte per year. Usually are CMR and 5400 to 7200 RPM spindle speeds. Usually the higher capacities are the faster spindle speeds. And as far as enterprise drives are concerned, they're higher endurance, 550 terabyte per year, have 5 year warranties, and span the gamut of 1 to 26 terabyte in capacity of drives. They are all CMR 7200 RPM drives for the most part. You do have a couple exceptions, but usually when you buy a enterprise drive, you're going to get a CMR 7200 RPM drive. And just note that disks can break at any time for any reason, regardless of the endurance rating and the warranty. So just because you buy a high-end enterprise drive with 550 terabyte per year endurance and a 5 year warranty doesn't mean that you put your data on there that it's going to be safe for that 5 year span. It has a lower likelihood of breaking within that time span, but than say a consumer drive, but there's still that potential that it could have some issues. It just means within that 5 year span you're going to get your drive replaced under warranty for free. So always have a backup. Now you may be wondering what hard drives work with what equipment. When it comes to a PC, pretty much any drive will work: a consumer, surveillance, NAS, or enterprise drive. Again, if you get an enterprise drive, data center drive, whatever you want to call it, look for a SATA interface and a 4KN drive. When it comes to a NAS, look for a NAS drive or an enterprise drive. Again, look at your, if it's an off-the-shelf NAS, look at your documentation for that to see what formats that it supports. Usually 4KN, 512E are fine. Just don't mix like a 4KN and a 512E or 512N drive in a RAID format if your system even allows it. And if it does, it may compromise performance considerably. You could use a consumer drive and a NAS if you really wanted to, but because of its lower workload rating, chances are it's not going to last quite as long as a NAS or enterprise type drive. When it comes to surveillance equipment, stick with a surveillance drive. It has the added features to it that will allow it to work most optimally with that surveillance equipment. So finally, what does all this mean if you're going to buy a hard drive? For the most part, brand doesn't matter. You will see some reports out there like the Backblaze annual drive report is really good information. You'll see like the AFR, the annualized failure rate for some drives are better than others. And yes, that's good data, but for the most part, when it comes to consumer buying drives for just 2 or 3 or 4 drives at a time for their system, that really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Again, a drive can die at any time for any reason, regardless of what the AFR says. The cost is usually driven by capacity and the warranty, which is related to the workload rating too. So that's why your consumer drives are cheaper than your NAS or your enterprise drives for the most part, because they're usually smaller capacity and shorter warranties. And drives pretty much, you should buy them based on their best dollar per terabyte and warranty, which again is related to the workload rating. So if you find a 4 terabyte drive for $100, and you think, oh, 4 terabyte is all I'll need, go ahead and take a look at the 6 and 8 terabyte capacities. You might be surprised to find like an 8 terabyte only costs $120. It's a much better dollar per terabyte, and it uses pretty much the same power, generates the same heat and noise as the 4 terabyte. So you're really not going to lose anything, and you just get more capacity. And again, when it comes to enterprise drives, make sure it's SATA or 4KN. You should also look at the spec sheets and consider the power consumption, whether it's air, helium, and the mounting hole locations. A lot of times you don't have a lot of choice in the matter. It is what it is when you buy a drive. But helium drives tend to be, um, it's pretty much guaranteed when you have a 12 terabyte and larger hard drive, and they tend to run cooler, use less power, generate less noise than an air drive. And when it comes to RPM and cache, it doesn't matter a whole lot. Basically, you just want to look at the performance of the drive. But for the most part, hard drives are slow. A 7200 RPM is going to be faster than a 5400 RPM, but still, you're looking at a couple hundred megabytes per second. And when you're looking at a 20 terabyte capacity hard drive, when you go to format that sucker, a full format, it's going to take a day and a half. So just have patience. Hard drives are slow. They're great at storing a lot of data, just they're not the fastest devices in the world. And finally, avoid SMR for anything but archival storage. I think I said enough about that. Basically, if you have like a movie or music collection that you're just going to read from periodically, it's perfectly fine. But if you're going to be, using it as a game drive or, doing video projects on it and stuff, I would avoid SMR if you can. So I hope all that was helpful, and until next time, thanks for watching.